Ripe Fruit is a nonprofit education initiative dedicated to identifying and strengthening innate skills as they appear along the spectrum of ways we think and learn. Our mission is to infuse mainstream learning with enhanced curriculum, customized lesson plans, and demonstrated creative systems. We aim to foster comprehensive learning, enthusiasm, and confidence for all students. The Dean Talks serves as a conduit, think tank, and intensive to discuss how to identify and support unique learning styles. All systems are go. The Dean Talks starts now. Welcome to He's Got Lead, the environmental episode of the Dean Talks. Many of our modern cities have a common problem. Lead poisoning lurks in places and can be inhaled, ingested, or eaten. Pica. It's a pervasive problem that causes developmental delays, learning difficulties, irritability, and fatigue. As well, incidents like the Flint water crisis, the Ohio train derailment, and recent Delaware River chemical spill have unknown impacts to water and food quality. This conversation extends to household mold, air quality, and a number of other factors. We're asking, what are the effects of environmental factors on our brain and mental health? The views expressed do not necessarily reflect the views of hosts or sponsors or Ripe Fruit Foundation. This information is not intended to replace therapeutic or medical advice. This session is being recorded and will be live on Facebook, Instagram, Clubhouse, and streaming live from Lisa's Consignment Shop. Today, we are joined by a groundbreaking panel. We have Ebony Kinney to help with our introductions. Ebony?
Okay, thank you and welcome everyone. First, let me tell you about Kellyanne Few. Ms. Few has over 20 years of experience as a civil environmental engineer and program manager with knowledge in hazardous material, waste management, water quality, pollution prevention, environmental management systems, facility management, and sustainability program development. She is focused on projects with an emphasis on the quality of life for individuals, families, and communities, resiliency through sustainability, supporting engaging cohesive communities, and establishing community investment funds, and implementing environmental and energy initiatives. Kellyanne, we're glad to have you.
It's a pleasure to be here. Thank you, Ebony.
Next, let me tell you about Agnes Agyekom. And I apologize, Alice, would you please take a moment to tell us so that we don't do this again? Tell us how to properly pronounce your name.
Yeah, sure. It's Agyekom.
Agyekom?
Yeah.
Awesome. Thank you, Agnes Agyekom. Is a mother of three and the founder and CEO of the Global Black Maternal Health Institute. As a maternal health advocate in the UK and former head of engagement at a national charity, Agnes has published articles and spoken extensively about the need for maternal health research to become more diverse and inclusive. In 2018, she founded the GLOMAMA, the Glow Mama Awards. Her work has been published by the World Health Organization, and her article, Why Bias is Key to Stopping Institutional and Structural Racism in Healthcare and Research, made it to the front page of International Nursing Journal Nurse Researcher. She sits on the NIHR, ARC, Maternity, and Perinatal Mental Health PPI Strategy Committee, and is a founding member of the Maternity Mental Health SEL Steering Group and Service User Voice Representative for the Maternity Transformation Program in the UK. They have launched the first Black Child Clean Air Conference, and they are currently undertaking a project looking at the experiences of parents at accessing special needs support for their children who are of Black heritage. Agnes Agyekom, thank you for being here.
Thank you for having me.
Awesome. And then last but not least, Al Hawkins. Al Hawkins, former U.S. Marine, is an ex-DC firefighter serving from 1970 to 1978 at Engine 10. It was the most active firehouse in the world. Thank you for your service, Al. From 78 to 1995, he became a manpower and development expert in the life and health insurance industry and blazed the world there. So Mr. Hawkins was attracted to this field, though, because of the severe impact lead-based paint, asbestos, and mold had on the public, especially children. In 2009, Mr. Hawkins formed Millman Systems, and the company specializes in two major activities: improving air quality by removing airborne spores in buildings that people inhale, which can cause cancer and even death, and mental effects, which we're going to discuss today. And Millman Systems manufactures a soil amendment product which promotes plant wellness. Mr. Hawkins, thank you so much for being here.
You're welcome. Thanks for having me.
All right, and I'm going to turn it back over to Steve with that.
Let's open the discussion with a video snippet to set the stage for our panel to join or react.
So mold can also cause brain inflammation. So this area called the hippocampus, which is the area of the brain that governs memory, learning, and your sleep-wake cycle, it's typically inflamed by mold toxins. Another thing that happens as it relates to mold toxicity is you have something called decreased neurogenesis. And that simply means you don't generate new nerve cells. That can lead to problems with focus and concentration. And I have so many patients who tell me they just can't learn new things. So decreased learning of new knowledge. Here are some other neurocognitive symptoms associated with mold illness. So we see memory loss present in about 70% of patients. Here at Amen Clinic, we actually have a memory rescue program. So our memory program is based on Dr. Amen's book, Memory Rescue, where we look at underlying causes of memory impairment and try to treat dementia, Alzheimer's naturally. But the key to that is understanding what the root cause is. And in so many patients that I see who suffer from cognitive impairment, it's due to the overproduction of mold toxins. And so treating those mold toxins, one of the goals is that it will help to foster improved brain health. Patients have extreme mental and physical fatigue. I mean, it's that debilitating fatigue where you can't get out of bed, you can't be physically active, your mind is just shutting down midday. Headaches, migraines, attention problems, executive functioning deficits, mood like anxiety, depression and OCD, and also visual changes.
On the tail end of that conversation, let's ask, there are a lot of external factors that impact brain and mental health. We know that, not just what she talked about. She talked about mold, but so many more. Can we discuss some of these? I mean, the examples can range from lead poisoning, mold toxicity, contaminated water, medications, prescription and holistic, radio waves, nitrates, is so many. So are we all in danger? And are we paying attention? I want to come to Agnes first to give us some insight on it.
Well, the short end of the answer is yes, we are in danger. As the founder of Global Black Maternal Health, in the UK, Black women are nearly four times more likely to die, and our babies were twice as likely to experience a stillbirth. The stats are similar in the UK. And so initially, the whole conversation was what's happening with Black bodies, what's going on in the hospital, which of course, that is a whole conversation about Black women not being listened to and so forth. But for us at Global Black Maternal Health, we started looking at what are the wider environmental factors that a lot of the time are resulting in Black women presenting at birth or during their pregnancy more sicker than their white or other ethnic counterparts. And we started looking at it from a kind of more of a social justice environmental approach. And what we found in the UK, is the stats are Black women, Black women our babies were twice as likely to experience a stillbirth. Women who live in areas of high level of air pollution, guess what the stats are? Twice as likely. So exactly the same correlation. In the UK, most Black communities live in urbanized areas, so in the cities and major industrialized areas. Equally, when we're looking at areas around autism, for example, Black communities in general, there's an increasing amount, we're overrepresented in a lot of areas around neurodiversity and so forth. And that's a whole other issue. But what we know is that women who are pregnant during and are exposed to high levels of air pollution, whether that's outdoor or indoor, we know that there's a whole kind of impact on the baby's brain development, right? And there's a whole term, I don't want to go too scientific, but when we're looking at epigenetics and the role that when you're pregnant, there's a whole conversation around what we breathe. People think sometimes it's what you eat in pregnancy and so forth, and that is true. But there's a whole compounding effect around what we're actually exposed to. And in a lot of our hospitals, a lot of women go and have carbon monoxide testing to see, around the impact of smoking in pregnancy. And there's so many women who are not smokers, but their carbon monoxide levels are off the chart, right? Because of what they're exposed to in their homes and also outside. So there's so much evidence, data, research, literature out there that is backing this up. But the challenge, particularly in the UK and America, you guys are a little bit more further ahead, but the environmental justice movement here in the UK is the least diverse sector next to farming in Britain. And I'm saying less than 5% across all ethnicities. So if we start now unpicking Black ethnicities in that whole pot, then you can imagine exactly where we're at. And so what it means is that within the kind of environmental justice movement around air pollution, there's not the voice of Blackness or African Caribbean communities. Our voice is not showing up there. So there's a whole lot of work to be done around that. But in short, our Black bodies are being impacted. Our children are being impacted. And when we're pregnant, the most vulnerable, the fetus, and our babies, their whole kind of trajectory of life is being impacted just because of what mummy's breathing during her pregnancies.
That was outstanding. And I think to add to that is, I guess throughout human history, we're used to, breathing air and eating food. And now with the ability to track how the environment does impact our bodies, it is very important to always be aware that there are external factors that impact not only our physical health, but our mental health. Yeah. Al Hawkins has some great insight into this, and we are discussing the many external factors that impact brain and mental health. Al?
Yeah. In the opening clip, the speaker mentioned a word that really got my antenna to go up, and that was inflammation. When you inhale mold spores, it creates inflammation not only in your brain, but in your whole body. And that inflammation has to get addressed by your immune system. When you're inhaling spores, every breath you take in your own home, every breath you take, you're adding more. So now your immune system is constantly paying attention to this inflammation caused by you inhaling those spores. So it cannot do what it was designed to do, which is help prevent heart attacks, help prevent cancers, a host of remedies, natural remedies for the body. It can no longer perform. So now you inhale the spores. Most molds can be carcinogens depending on the substrates they're feeding on. So you inhale, let's say, a black mold, what's termed a black mold. They call them that because they are black, but they have a tar-like consistency, and they tend to stick to whatever tissue they come in contact with in your sinuses and your lungs and so forth. So these molds produce mycotoxins, one in particular, which is a tricothycin mycotoxin, we know is very, it produces cancer without a doubt. So these mycotoxins are stuck to your tissue. They live better in you than they do out because they've got all the food they need, they've got the moisture, they've got the heat. And so they thrive inside your body. And they produce these mycotoxins, which are just constantly being pumped inside of you. And it creates a lethargic situation. Like the speaker said, you don't want to get out the bed in the morning. Even when you're laying in bed at night, the most dangerous time to inhale these spores are right before you hit that REM sleep. That's when you need the most oxygen during any time during the day, because your body, your organs start to shut down, your breathing becomes shallow, and that's when you really need oxygen. And if you're breathing in mold spores, which is heavier than oxygen, and displace oxygen, if you're breathing in mold spores, when you get up in the morning, you're exhausted. You feel like you've been in a fight all night, and you're just tired. So as a result, you get this, what I term brain fog, or you're not functioning mentally properly. I've seen people, I've gone to their homes to do inspections, and one guy in particular steps out in my mind. He had called me and asked me to please come and inspect his home. He knew he was in danger. He was itching, he was sneezing, he couldn't think properly. And when this guy opened the door, I've known him for some time. When he opened the door, he went to shake my hand, and before I could reach out and touch his hand, his arm just dropped. He turned around, and we walked into the space. And I immediately took him out on the balcony to get him out of that environment, because I could feel it when I went into the house. When we were on the balcony, which just happened to be where his air handler was for his heater. And I opened that closet door, and the closet was full of mold. The return duct, which sucks air into that unit, was right there, and it was sucking the mold spores into the unit and distributing it throughout the house. So it's no wonder he was cognitively impaired. But it goes deeper than that. It affects that immune system, like I was saying. That inflammation that gets in your body just tears that immune system up so that it can't do what it would normally do, and that's protect you from having cancers and things of that nature.
That was enlightening, Al, and I think you certainly bring a lot of things to surface when it comes to your statement about what's going on inside your body really allows some of these external influences to thrive. Agnes, did you have some additional to add?
Yeah, I was just also going to kind of add to what kind of Al said, which was just, there's not much to add in terms of the clarity that he put there. But the fact that the person that you went to see didn't know. And I think that's also, when we're talking about structural inequalities, it's the thing of even saying clean air. That's a luxury. If you've only ever lived in certain home environments or certain outdoor environments or in certain communities, how do you even know what clean air is? So a lot of the times our communities are being disproportionately impacted. We're suffering from fatigue. It's impacting our mental health and our well-being, our abilities to get jobs and hold down jobs. Like I was saying before, when we're talking about epigenetics and what's going on with our unborn babies, and we're producing babies whose health has already been impacted just from what mum's been exposed to. And we don't know. And the lack of not knowing means, how do we then advocate for ourselves? How do we then challenge our, in the UK, we would say MPs and councillors, so probably your statesmen and your representatives. How do we even make sure that our foot's on their neck to ensure that there's changes if we do not know what's happening to us? And there was another point that I wanted to add. In the UK, the leading cause of death for Black women within the kind of maternal health disparities that are in the UK and the US. But in the UK, it's cardiovascular and heart disease. And what we know is when we're looking at air pollution, yes, there's the neurodiverse impacts that it has on our brain, but also on the tail end of that, you know, it causes heart attacks and cardiovascular disease, and that's the leading cause of death of Black women in the UK during their pregnancies. So there's so many different layers. But what we're hearing time and time again is it's like Black women are broken, or Black communities are broken, or our children are more aggressive, or, you know, all these different points without anyone looking at what the environmental factors are, or keeping us ignorant so that we can't go and do the fight and ensure that our rights are being protected.
I was intrigued by the fact, what is quote unquote fresh air? If you live in New York City, for example, you know, there are people who live in New York and will say, I need to get some fresh air, and walk outside or stick their head out the window or whatever. And you know, I guess in their mind, they're getting fresh air from being inside. But the reality is that's where all the toxicity occurs. We're discussing the many external factors that impact brain and mental health. Kellyanne?
Yes. First, I want to say Happy Earth Day to everyone. I think this is a day that represents access to information. And I think that's one part of how we begin to address diversity, equity, and inclusion and impacts on our health. Having access to information so we can identify exposure and impacts to these toxins, whether it's lead, mold, or other contaminants, we have to begin to identify resources for the educator, for the manager, for the community advocate, for the business leader that's serving the community. And so, for example, just focusing in on lead, we have to begin to empower individuals to understand that lead is impacting us from all angles. You know, whether it's lead-based paints, which was banned in 1978, but there might be some exposure to the housing and the buildings that our children are spending all day in. You know, it might be that some of the toys and things that we buy are being imported and might have lead in it. It might be the water that's, you know, that is resulting in leaching pipes that have the lead. So we have to begin to educate and empower our community to bring attention to these things that are exposing us to these contaminants. And then once we do that, we have to look at those neurodiverse impacts that we're having on our body, as Agnes said, that are impacting not only our brain cells, but the vascular system, right? And then how do we go about addressing them, you know? And then I'm sure Al is going to talk about the nutrients in our food and how we ensure that we get access to the best quality of food, because we know that food is what is the healer, is the true healer. And so it's our job to to get the leaders, managers, and educators to, one, observe, two, identify, empower ourselves, and leverage the resources that are within the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency, within CDC, within these grassroots organizations. So that's, you know, where I would like this group to take this access to information. And so I'll let the group continue on, but I'll chime in later. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. And, you know, one of the things I kind of wonder about is the more technology that we have that recognizes what is external versus internal and levels that we have of this and of that. Is there any way to actually get to a space of holistics where, you know, we can begin to shield, you know, some of these inputs to our body? let's go to another video as we continue.
Are you artificial intelligence? Is that where we're going with that one?
Well, it's how you're impacted from the, from the, how they say, from the cradle to the grave with these external factors. It's like the more that we can see, the more that we recognize is harmful. And I just don't know, when that cycle is going to stop or what we can do about it, which is why conversations like this are so important. We're honing in on, for example, lead, and Al's, certainly gonna speak on that in more detail. But you've seen people eating paint and some of these what drives the body to require something like that. It's just interesting, but it's also toxic. So I'm going to continue with our video snippet as we continue Dean Talks.
Bedroom. This is my Faraday cage, my little sanctuary and my prison. Where do I begin? Stabbing pain through my head, my heart will stop, and then the next one I go bang. Sometimes with the tinnitus, it's literally like something is boring into you. For me, it's like a blender, putting your head right next to a blender and that's how it is. When I first realised there was something wrong, I used to go to college via Waterloo. I'd walk past a crowd of people and I'd be getting a pain in my head. My only understanding of it was, am I developing a crowd phobia? And then little by little...
That video kind of began to illuminate some of those external factors, crowd phobias. And of course, if you're getting on the loo, which is the version of the subway or the train, I guess, the public transportation, that certainly puts you in close contact with other people and what they have also brought into your environment. So, as I was saying earlier, this exposure just kind of spirals on and on. And that's whether symptoms are real or perceived. What can teachers, coworkers, and organizations do to inform themselves of when someone is suffering from a cognitive deficit as a result of an environmental factor, and how to create a safe space for them? Al?
Yeah, my specialty is mold. I got involved in the environmental business beginning with lead and asbestos. We did some encapsulation there. And I broke off from that to go to mold because no one understood mold. And I understood that it was if you had mold, you could see it on the wall. It would be ugly, but it wouldn't jump off the wall and do anything to you. It was what came off of that you didn't see, that you were inhaling, that caused all the damage. So environmental issues, whether it be the waves that come from transmitters, are wreaking havoc on our health. And what I'm finding out, or what I found out, is that most physicians are not trained on these environmental issues. I've talked to them over and over again about, as I mentioned earlier, about what inhaling mold spores does to it creates the inflammation and wreaks havoc on your immune system and compromises it. And I get blank looks when I speak to them on that. So I sure don't want to talk to them about radio waves. But one, you look into this and you find out that even asthma, the asthma rate is going up expeditiously year by year. And let's just look at Baltimore, for instance. You open a door going to the basement, and if any of you have ever been to an old house in Baltimore, you open the door leading to the basement, you don't even have to go down the stairs. You can feel it, you can smell the dampness in that basement that gets there by the old stone foundation walls that don't allow running water, but just enough moisture to create the sporulation process, the mold reproductive process. And inhaling, especially Aspergillus penicillium, will cause you to have asthma where you normally wouldn't have had it. So that's why Baltimore has almost twice the rate of asthma as the state of Maryland. Then you look across the country, Philadelphia, same old stone foundation walls. They've got twice the asthma rate as the state of Pennsylvania. Memphis, Detroit, right on across the country. So, you know, I think what you guys are doing, shedding light on these problems, is going to help tremendously. Education of the people is very important. They've never, and it's a real common sense type of thing. You know, if you're having itching, if you're having respiratory problems, if you're coughing, you know, and then that doesn't happen when you leave your home, you know, then that common sense should tell you something's in that home that's causing you to react like that. And I recall hearing a doctor speak he was a holistic doctor, spoke on the radio here in DC. And I said, boy, that guy sounds real caring. I called his office, and for some reason they passed me right back to him. And I told him, I said, you guys are missing the boat. He said, what do you mean? I said, well, you're prescribing medications that further weakens the immune system, all these antibiotics and so forth that you're prescribing for people that have asthma and allergies and all these different types of illnesses. You're weakening the immune system, then you send them right back home to the contaminated environment that triggered them coming to you in the first place. When are you going to start testing the air in their home to find out what they're inhaling? When are you going to have someone go in and do a mold inspection to see if that's possibly a cause of what they're coming to you for? You can check their stool, you can check their urine, you can check their blood to pick up fungus. If it's in abnormal amounts, then you know they got some issues, more than likely at home or on their job, where they're inhaling these spores. And he was honest. He told me, he said, now this is a doctor that's been in business for over 50 years. He said, I never thought of that. When can you come in? And I told him, I'm on my way. We went there. I went there and spoke to him. He said, you got to go see an allergy buddy of mine. We went to his office. We spoke from 7 o'clock at night to 10. And I had a certain product that's an aerosol that helped get it out of the air. So I didn't have it with me. He said, I want to see that product. I said, well, I'll drop a can off to you in the morning. Went there the next morning. He saw me come up through his window, left his patient, pulled me into his conference room and said, you know, based on what we talked about last night, I believe the first 3 patients through the door have mold contamination. One came in with his wife, whom I've been treating for a little over 2 years. And I started to write the normal prescription. And I asked them, based on what we talked about last night, you ever have any water intrusion in your home? And they looked at each other funny. And the wife said, yeah, a little over 2 years ago, we had a flood in the basement. We don't go down there now because it still stinks. Well, that stinking is off gassing from mold spores. And so he asked me to go in, test the house. Bingo. There it was. The air test proved that what they were being treated for was the mold content in their home. I treated the house, and I never heard from that doctor again. He lost a patient. And I unfortunately, that's the reality of the situation. He didn't want me taking out all of his patients.
Wow.
Well, I was going to jump in there, Stephen. I wonder about that. What's interesting about that video is there is a level of sort of bullying or ostracizing, people being set aside. So that's such a big part of this conversation, I think. And there's at least two things that jump out from what Al said in that video. People feeling like they are outside of the rest, they're outside of normal if they think about these things and do something about it. And there's at least this piece of, I need to be resilient. Yes, there's something coming up from my basement, meeting me in the nose, but I'm just going to be resilient. And how's that working against our best interests? And that's just, it's interesting. I wanted to chime in that thought, see what we think.
Yeah, I also wanted to kind of add on to that. So in the UK recently, there was a massive case because a little boy, his name is Awab Ishaq, he sadly died as a result of the black mold in his apartment. And his parents, who were migrants, who had gone to the council time and time again, had been ignored. They had kept them saying, look, this is having a detrimental impact on my child. He kept them being ignored. And now it's a watershed moment in the UK because of the housing and the mold and not being listened to, resulting in a little 2-year-old boy losing his life. And so all the things that Al just mentioned, this is real life stuff. And if we look at the fact that on the tail end, it causes death, then that's the mortality, then the morbidity in between, think of all of the different impacts, like, when we're talking about, the brain and the impact on the brain, then definitely before you would get to the stage of death, there is going to be a knock-on effect on your organs, on your brain development, on your fog. And so then the question is, how many children who are not getting to a stage, because it shouldn't have to get to a stage where a little boy dies, right? For now, housing providers and landlords to start opening up their eyes. What's going on for those children who they're not dying, but they're having flare-ups with their asthma and serious respiratory issues? Maybe they were going to be future NFL players or soccer players, or the next Serena Williams and so forth. But because of the environment that they're living in, it's having a debilitating impact on their health. They could have been our next, presidents or lawmakers and so forth. But because from that stage where you're so malleable, as a child and your brain developments, let alone us as adults, how we're impacted, that future is robbed away from you. So I think it's really important that we are having this conversation, but also looking at, so what is the cost to our communities, right? From a mortality issue, but also in terms of the economic cost of all those children and adults whose futures are being robbed because they don't realize there's a silent killer that's not just killing their lives, but also their dreams, their hopes, and their ambitions.
That was very powerfully said. I think that what we continue to circle back to is awareness, and that's great. But one of the missions that we have, especially at Ripe Fruit, is how we can take some of these conversations and turn them into actions. And for example, we are working on special lesson plans and soundproofing desks and anti-stimulation areas, quiet corners in the classrooms, things that can actually be done to impact this external kind of issue wherever possible. We are now going to, does the panel have anything else to add to that? Because again, these areas, these topics, we can kind of continue for, just.
No, I just wanted to add to that. I think you're right. It's about what interventions can we add. One of the things that we're doing, so as you mentioned in the beginning, we've launched the first Black Child Clean Air Conference. And that conference came about because last year we spoke to over 200 Black pregnant women and women with children 5 years and under, just first of all, to start off understanding what's their awareness of air pollution and the impact of air pollution, both indoor and outdoor. And I think it's really important that we also understand from the community's perspective, what is their baseline, and then start looking at the interventions that we can bring in for whether that, because when you say the word air pollution, it really, that language there, in our community, in the UK anyway, it usually acts as a barrier of engagement. People think, oh, air pollution, climate change, that's like 100 years from now. I'm dealing with my own issues, cost of living, all of these other type of things. However, our research already kind of shown that when you dig deep, when you started talking about respiratory, when they were open text boxes, people talked about respiratory issues. They talked about, things like migraines or things like miscarriage. Or I think, Stephen, you mentioned about in New York, when people open the window and say fresh air. Well, there was one of our respondents said, well, when they open the window, they're on a main road. And when they close it, there's damp. And then there's also a cost of living crisis. So which one do you choose? And the newborn baby was having respiratory issues. So she didn't know what to do in such a scenario. So I think it is really important that we also find out from the community, what does air pollution look like? So is mental health the segue in? Is neurodiversity the segue in? But looking at it from a community approach and then building interventions and building awareness based on where the community are at.
It's almost like if you look at how the human body works, on a cellular level, I think maybe we get this false sense of protection that our body is just going to automatically adapt and change when we don't even know what's impacting our body. And that goes back to the level of awareness that we do have. How do we use that level of awareness? How do we measure mold? How do we measure pollution? How do we measure these things so that we can continue to come up with a way forward? Because it's not going to take 100 years. It's happening now in real time. This is the Dean Talks. My name is Steve. I'm your host. We have an illustrious panel with us as we continue to explore the topic of external factors and how they impact not only mental capacity and mental functioning, but the physicality of that. We have another video to take a look at as we continue to explore this topic.
Lead doesn't know race, it doesn't know gender, it doesn't know income. Simply put, the toxic legacy of lead is so strong, kids in Baltimore are still being poisoned today.
I have been living with this poison for as long as I can remember. I have not known how this poison has affected me for as long as I can remember. I've never ever received any education behind a poison that's supposed to be killing me.
When you have lead and you're younger, it's tougher to deal with it because it's hard to think. You do your actions and then you think later. My childhood was corrupted and my childhood was taken from me.
We know that lead is a form of environmental racism. We know that it has impacted generations of people. That should be something that is on the forefront.
Lead poisoning is a root cause. If you get rid of lead, you can address a whole lot of issues.
If you know it's a problem and you have some type of power and you choose to remain silent, you're a part of that problem.
The quote is, if you ask people who live here, Black people, is that everybody has lead.
So we can look at the humanity work that needs to be done in the classrooms, workspaces, communities, and our society to decrease exposure to toxins, increase knowledge of exposure, and of holistic means of healing. It begs the question, if greed is driving the bus, and when some of these dangers still exist, but only in particular communities, what should we be doing about it? How do we get active? Kellyanne?
Yes, it's time. It's time to train individuals to go in, right? And I say in, increase the insight, inspect, interpret, influence, and inject. And I think that both Al and Agnes touched on that by describing some of their case studies. Al said, I didn't hesitate. I went into the home, right? I didn't hesitate. I went into the doctor's office. Agnes said, I took information into the community, right? So what we have to do is begin to accept that this is our environment and these are the things that are happening. But now, how do I empower our community to go in? And I think, as Ebony and Steve facilitate these sessions and encourage us to go in, we have to identify ways to support and fund these activities. We need to go to the federal agencies and the government agencies in the UK and request support for these actions, for these activities. We have programming, we have resources that we are designing, and now let's go get this funded so the action that we take can be supported on the grassroots level, right? And so the goal is to go in, and that will overcome any economic abuse, social abuse. It's us being empowered to move forward. And I hope that Steve got to our question. And maybe have some discussions to build on that.
Yeah, absolutely. One of the things that I think we should be aware of, especially for those of us that have seen this transition of technology. I'm from the school pre-internet where if you wanted to, communicate with someone, you had to actually sit down and write what's called a letter. And then you had to wait for the post office to send that letter. And maybe a week later, they would get the letter that says, you look at this whole 2 week. Now, using technology, we can use our cell phones. These cell phones, it's interesting to think about. The cell phones that we have now have as much broadcast power as, 20 years ago, ABC or CBS or NBC's news department. We hold all of that in our hand. And I said that to say this. We can document in real time what goes on. We can share our stories with others via social media. We can make our own documentaries. You can go to your app store, the Google Play Store, and download apps to do full video editing. So we have the technology to push these messages forward. How are we using this technology to make real impacts when it comes to external situations that are impacting both our mental and physical health? We're going to go to another video to continue to drive home this topic, and we will continue our discussion. Go ahead.
Before you do, you asked an interesting question there, and I think it is a matter not only of, we have to gather the data, but it's not just showing them the data. It's not just showing the decision makers and the powers that be what we have collected. There's got to be another step in there because people know, they are aware. Now, it's hard to be met with it. Like we're listening to the stories now, you're touched. It's hard to be met with it and not react in the moment. But if you can avoid being met with it and you're kind of, you have to catch up with me, right? How, though, do we evoke that next level of action? I know there's a lot of efforts Al is doing. I know Agnes is active. Kellyanne, I know you're on the individual level, helping people get grassroots off the ground. How do you actually, not just presenting the data as evoking the change, how do we actually get the change to happen? Maybe it's something to think about as we move forward in the conversation.
That's it's almost like these are invisible killers. So what do you do to have the audience, the community, engage in what they cannot see? And by the time they feel it, is it too late? So that's really the question. So, put that on the Ripe Fruit Foundation agenda, Ebony. How do we bring this to light, and how do we get people to engage in these external factors that are impacting them? Because it just changes from place to place, from where you live, from city to rural. There's so many things that you have to take into consideration. But the good thing is that we now are at least beginning to have the tools that can identify what the problems are, so then we can create action steps. Let's go to our video, and continue the Dean Talks.
A new study on teen vaping suggests a disturbing link to one's mental health. Last year, more than 2.5 million middle and high school students reported using e-cigarette products, and more than a quarter were daily users, according to the CDC. A survey of about 2,000 teens and young adults found those who vape were more likely to report symptoms of anxiety or depression. Let's bring in Dr. Lauren Wold. He is a professor and associate dean for research at Ohio State University's College of Medicine. Doctor, what's your reaction to the study?
Thanks so much for having me, Catherine. What's really interesting about this study is that we really didn't appreciate the association between vaping, both vaping with nicotine and or vaping with THC, and the potential implications with mental health challenges, particularly in youth and young adults. And I think what this study has brought to light is the underreported association between vaping and mental health challenges. And I think what we need to now focus on is looking at, is this a causative factor, which is, are the users using vaping to combat the feelings of depression, anxiety, etc., or is it potentially is the vaping causing the issues with mental health?
Vaping. So we went, let's just pause for a second and rewind the clock. I remember when you could smoke on airplanes. I remember when you could smoke in a doctor's office. I remember when you could smoke in the supermarket. And then all of a sudden, awareness becomes more available. And we see, I remember a study that was, many, just back in the 60s, many years ago, that said, smoking cigarettes actually helps remove toxins out of the body. It's crazy. And then as we become more aware of what the carcinogens are and how that impacts you, we obviously made changes. And now you can't smoke anywhere. And all of that has happened within the last 50 years. The topic of vaping now comes up. Hey, introduce nicotine into your body in what would be considered a safer way because you're using vapor instead of burning, burning paper or tobacco or what have you. So there's been this shift in what's acceptable, and now you see that vaping is dangerous. So living with these conditions that are definitely traumatic is something that we'll address in just a moment. But I'm just almost stunned at how quickly people adapt to inhaling and ingesting, some of these, carcinogenic vehicles or whatever, whether it be through regular tobacco or whether it be through vaping. So how can those affected regain their power and voice around their condition versus falling into familiar patterns set by home environments or societal expectations? How can we support them in shifting the narrative? Kellyanne?
Well, I think we have to be real that a lot of this was marketing and impacts that marketing strategies have on individuals, youth. You opened it out talking about middle school and high school students are taking on this habit. And so I think there has to be a discussion around the impacts of marketing. We're talking about the toxins, and I don't know if that's a psychological toxin that we're dealing with that we need to begin to address when it comes to diversity, equity, and inclusion, and how it impacts our neurotransmitters and how we think. And then I'm going to go back to the greatest influencer that I've had, my grandmother and our family members who instilled in us how we make decisions as individuals. There has to be a point at which we take it back home and apply the responsibilities to ourselves and the person in the mirror to make the best decisions. Yes, as advocates and business leaders and educators, we do influence decisions, and we do that based on some level of management and action that we take within these systems. But yeah, I'm going to say, let's talk about impacts to society and how we're walking our blocks. That's what I'll start this discussion off with.
Okay. And do any of our other panelists want to chime in?
Yeah, I think it should be known how broad this situation is. I can relate just to mold. I mean, anything that you bring into your body that's foreign and not God-given is going to have an adverse effect on your body. But I recall a conference I went to at Bowie State University. Kellyanne, you may have been there, where I was able to give a presentation. At the end of the presentation, the narrator asked the audience of about 200 people, she wanted to see the hands of anyone who had not had a leaky pipe, leaky roof, or flooded basement. And nobody raised their hand. So it's a very big, huge problem with mold. We get a flooded basement, we go in with the water wet vac and we clean it up. We think we've cleaned it up. And you get the outside of the drywall, but you don't treat the inside of the drywall. And that's where the spores form. And you can go in and cut just about in anybody's basement where the house has been there over a period of time. They've had a leak, back up, drain outside the door, and water's intruded. And you can cut that drywall, and on the backside of it, it's black. So, I would encourage, just with those stats, the 200 people, nobody raised their hand. Everybody's experienced some type of water intrusion. I would encourage just about anybody, even with new homes, until we learn to put the roof on first, you're going to get water during construction. And, that creates the mold. But I would encourage anybody to get air testing done. It's not a foolproof system, but it's the best source we have for determining what you're breathing, what you're inhaling into your body. Get air testing done. And that requires a person coming in, and we do air testing with these little cassettes. We put it on, attach it to a pump. That pump pulls air through it. There's medium in there that traps the spores, and a good lab can tell you how much is in there in the residence, what type it is. They'll give you a genus and species, and they'll also tell you how the type molds found affect the human body. So that information is very valuable in determining what you've been inhaling, what you've been subjected to. I have a good friend who's up at Sloan Kettering. She's from Africa, but been to Sloan Kettering up in New York for being treated for cancer for 9 months. And she's getting ready to have an operation to remove her breast. And I asked her over the phone last week, I said, you don't smoke, you don't drink. Where do you think this cancer's come from? And she said, I've been giving it a lot of thought and I can't come up with an answer. And I asked her, I said, do you have mold in your home back in Ghana? And without hesitation, she says, yes. So here the common sense comes to play again. So she immediately asked, said, look, when you go back, would you please test my home? And I agreed to do that. But I see this too often, you get cancer. Yeah, but where'd it come from? Especially if you don't smoke or drink. Where'd the cancer come from? It's got, 9 times out of 10 is some environmental issue, and mold's at the top of the list.
So mold is pervasive. I know my story about mold is I know someone who was so severely impacted by mold that there were actual mold spores that were connected and growing within their sinus cavity.
Yes. Yes.
I mean, if you think about that, it goes back to what Al said. The human body provides this, kind of optimum situation for these spores to grow. And by the time you notice it, because it grows slowly, so your body kind of adapts to it, gets used to it. Just kind of how you go into a place that has a certain smell, and after just a few moments, you don't smell it anymore as your body adapts to that smell. And meanwhile, these silent killers are creeping around inside you. You're listening to the Dean Talks. My name is Steve. We have a great panel. We have a great conversation going on here about external factors that impact us both mentally as well as physically. Panel, do we have any any closing statements about this topic?
Yeah, I'd just like to touch on what Kellyanne said earlier as well about marketing. When we're looking at kind of vapors, and even when we look at the history of cigarettes, it was always marketed at the youth. So I think that's another thing that we need to be wary of. It's vaping this time around. In 20 years, it could be something else, but it's this thing of, marketing to the youth so that as they grow up and become adults, they're already addicted and hooked before we know what's going on. So I think there does need to be an awareness around how we can protect the young really from being susceptible, so that at least if you're making choices, they're informed choices as adults and not as young people who are malleable and then end up becoming addicted. You shouldn't be, even if something's good for you, you shouldn't be addicted to anything. That's the main thing. Even if it's too much of anything isn't good, let alone things that we haven't researched thoroughly about and haven't got the evidence based on.
I certainly agree. Marketing. And I really don't think that we spend enough time talking about the marketing aspect of this, but using examples again. Look at what is being done now with the cigarette manufacturers. They had to take the cartoon images off the cigarette packs because that targets the young people. That's marketing. And imagine that not thousands, not millions, but billions of dollars that are spent to get people used to, kind of contaminating their own bodies.
Yeah.
All right. So we're going to shift over to the panel's promos area here. And, what we want to know now is what our panelists are working on. Make sure that you provide your contact information while you're speaking, and we'll also place that in the chat. So let's start with Al. Al, what are you working on?
Well, we're working on getting a new formula into aerosol cans that homeowners can use themselves to fog their homes and get the spores out of the air. We're also working on we just opened up a production plant to produce this product. This is a soil amendment that goes into the soil and gets rid of the fungus that gets into the plants. To give you an idea how bad that situation is, I'm sitting at the table peeling a banana at my kitchen table. My wife called me. I put the raw banana on top of a napkin, went to see what she wanted, came back and picked the banana up, and the napkin was black. That was Sagatoka negla fungus that was in there. So immediately to my mind came, I'm saying, gee, how much of this is the skin of the banana looked perfect, but this is a soil-borne problem. That's why we have a soil treatment system that actually got into the meat of that banana. And what I'm thinking now is how much of this is getting crushed and made into baby food, that goes into an infant's body. And you got to realize that we as adults have an immune system that can help fend off some of these fungal attacks. But an infant's immune system is forming. They don't have anything. It goes right in and does its damage without any defense mechanism. So it's a huge problem in our food chain as well as in our environments, in our homes. We got to pay attention. We got to use common sense with what we're doing to help prevent problems befalling us and our families.
So as far as contacting you, Al, we're going to put some stuff in the chat, but do you have an email address or something that we can have here? Because I just want to make everyone aware that these Dean Talk podcasts are here. They are saved in the cloud. They'll be here 1,000 years from now. So, we want to make sure that as people listen to these, that they have a way to reach out to our illustrious panel. So Al, how would someone reach out to you?
Yes, you can reach me through Millman Systems, MILLMAN Systems, plural, .mole @gmail.com. Phone number is 301-529-0627. Again, the email is Millman Systems, MILLMAN .mole @gmail.com.
Okay. Thank you very much for that. And let's go to Kellyanne.
Yes.
Kellyanne, what are you working on right now? And how would our audience get in touch with you?
Yes, well, I continue to lead, educate, advocate, and design sustainability solutions from the grassroots level. I'm often looking for small businesses to pair with larger government so we could get that funding stream going through proposals and grants. So I can be reached at kfew@me.com. And my next event, I'm going to be talking about immunity and really the cellular level of healing our bodies based on these exposures. And so on April 29th, I will be in Laurel talking about cellular healing with another panel. And so I will make sure that you and Ebony have access to that link so you could share it and invite others to come and have a discussion around ourselves and how do we truly address the impacts of these toxins through how we eat, how we live, how we think, and how we breathe. So I want to thank you for allowing me to spend my Earth Day with you. And I look forward to us all going in. Thank you.
All right, absolutely. It was a pleasure having you. And I wanted to take this time just to mention, we do share all of our content across all of our platforms at Ripe Fruit Foundation. And at last count, we are somewhere around 150, 160,000 impressions. So this message is getting out. And we certainly want to thank you for your participation and thank our audience for listening and then interacting. Agnes, how do we get in touch with you and what are you working on right now?
Right, well, at the moment, we're working, our big kind of substantive project is the Black Child Clean Air program. So we will be launching our report on the 14th of June. So that's the day before Clean Air Day. So we have a day called Clean Air Day here in the UK. And the 15th of June will be our conference. And it's really about kind of a lot of the themes that we've discussed here. How do we make sure that the community is engaged, really communicating to policymakers, to in the environmental movement, but also, again, leading from the community so that we can have this kind of collaborative approach to solutions. We're also working on Project Next Gen B, which is a groundbreaking project based here in London, which is all about looking at the experiences of parents accessing special educational needs support for their children, Black children in particular. The reason this is so important is because of the adultification of Black children in the UK. Black children as young as 3-4, so that's kindergarten, I believe, in America, but are 3 to 4 times more likely to be excluded from school, and that goes beyond from when we're looking at the school system or primary system all the way to the criminal justice system, right? So when we're looking at neurodiversity, when we're looking at sensory issues, Al touched on so many of these points, what we know is that if our children are being impacted and our educators don't really have an understanding on how these environmental factors are impacting their mental health, behavior and so forth, then they're being criminalized instead of given the grace and the support in order to heal, the nutrition, all these things. So Project Next Gen B is also another project that we're working on in parallel. And it's all about kind of evidence, raising awareness, and then bringing about solutions that are from the grassroots up to policymakers. And my details hopefully should be dropped into the chat, but you can find me. So our website is www.globalblackmaternalhealth.org. And my email, because we have a parent company, is Agnes at blackpearlconsultinggroup.co.uk.
Thank you so much for participating. And once again, Agnes has joined us from London, England, which again just goes to the worldwide reach of Ripe Fruit Foundation. You can always go to ripefruit.org to contact our speakers. And I also wanted to mention, along with streaming on our social media platforms, we were also streaming live at Lisa's Luxury Consignments. And I want to thank you, Lisa. Save money and the earth in style. Shop women-owned, Black-owned, Baltimore-based Lisa's Luxury Consignments in Mount Washington Village at 1501 Soulgrave Avenue. Sustainable and upcycled. Lisa's carefully curated shop survived 3 years of COVID and is open Tuesday through Saturday from 12:30 to 6:30 p.m. and Sundays from 12:30 to 5:30 p.m. Lisa's Luxury Consignment is also on Facebook, Instagram, Poshmark, and Etsy. Are you in Baltimore? Stop by Lisa's Luxury Consignments in person for happy hour on Fridays. Once again, visit ripefruit.org to contact our speakers. And for our big hits and takeaways, we're going to go to Ebony Kinney. Ebony.
Okay, first I just want to say how humbled we are to have each and every member of the panel and every guest that came and joined us today, and everyone that listens to this into eternity, right? Some of the big hits that really resonated for me was when Al talked about how the spores hit you right before you go to sleep. Like that's a very vulnerable moment for you in your home, and how that's a place where you might be even more protected. So wearing your mask outside, fine. What's happening inside the home, right? And then Agnes talked to us about pregnant mothers that need the highest amount of advocacy. And then that's just worldwide, because in the US, we're having this raised concern and awareness about BIPOC moms and this highest risk. And it's everywhere. It's everywhere. So how can we join forces came up for me, and how can we become, just more knowledgeable because of the raised awareness that's happening worldwide. Clean air as a luxury. That just, as a quotable, that just kind of stunned me. We have to leverage resources, Kellyanne came and talked about, and share what we know. There's this piece about us figuring out how to have our own watershed moment. So we can kind of force the watershed moment if we take what we know and bring it together, right? How can we, really create this crescendo, this moment of awareness and, being on the right side of history prior to that, and that sort of conversation. We talked about economic costs of lives and dreams that are just that the cost of not doing anything about it, right? There's an economic cost. There's, of course, the cost of a life, but if you haven't been fully realized, if you're having these neurological effects in grade school, and then you never fully realize as a student or come into your own as a thinker, as a studier, then that's a missed opportunity possibly for you and for your family. So while everyone's really interested right now about making sure that you create legacies and life work for your families that come behind you by investing in properties and investing in the stock market, there's also this piece of what is the mental legacy, what is the health legacy that you're raising in your family. So we talked about community research and how that's a segue into interventions. I love this idea, Kellyanne, you put forward about doing interventions around health, around mold, around contaminants and toxins. thought that was very innovative. And you talked about going in, and I just wanted to repeat it because that was really salient point. Go in, increase, insight, inspect, interpret, influence, and inject. So we can have a whole nother session on that and maybe create some sort of lesson around it. Just showing the data isn't enough. We've kind of reached that moment, and how do we get people to care more without feeling like some sort of an outsider, right? Are we more susceptible to marketing? Are BIPOC communities more susceptible to marketing? Are we the audience, right, that we need to be paying attention to? It kind of, that message was for us to get us kind of off on the wrong track. And, Al said a lot about it being common sense. And as we know, common sense isn't so common. So how can we make this very important knowledge more common for people that need to hear it the most? So we're continuing to work forward on these. I'll probably reach out to each and every one of these panelists to talk about lesson plans and games that could potentially come from this conversation. But again, just deep quality content. And again, I'm just so grateful for everyone who was able to take the time to join. And I hope that you share and continue to tell friends about this conversation that's happening.
Okay. Ebony, just as you know, we have you here, and Ebony is the founder of not only Ripe Fruit Creative, but the Ripe Fruit Foundation. And we have been passionately doing work in this lane. Can you tell us a little bit about the concepts that you're working on as far as engagement goes? Because I can tell you, we had a meeting, and Ebony said, "Okay, people, enough talking. Let's get some action steps." So Ebony, just give us little precursors to some of the things that you're working on when it comes to these initiatives of Ripe Fruit Foundation.
Absolutely, Steve. And then while I'm talking at you a little bit, I'm going to launch a poll for those that are in here so you can share some of your insights. And we do this every session. So one important piece that we're working on right now is a social emotional learning focused piece of content, and it's called emotional transparency tags. And it's a way to create art therapy and this sort of get in touch with your feelings moment by engaging with students and adults and all different types of situations people might be in. There's a homeless shelter interested. There's a class of college design students interested in making, what does it feel like? What is it, I'm feeling sad, I'm feeling happy, I'm feeling, afraid. There are about 7 emotions that everything we feel can be filtered through. What does that look like? What is the visual of that? And so how can we create it in little tags and little visuals that we can supply in learning environments so that students can make it available to their teacher? Maybe they give it to their teacher discreetly. Maybe they waive it. Maybe when they're just not engaging, the teacher offers this as a way for them to say how they're feeling. So we've heard specifically in the community here, a lot of kids have experienced trauma. In fact, kids are a large group that have experienced PTSD because someone in the neighborhood got shot or someone died, right? And so how can we help them work their way through emotion? So it's not hereditary. This not talking about how you feel and not talking about the smell that's coming from the basement, so that it's not hereditary. It doesn't have to perpetuate. So that's one major piece that we're working on. We also have a couple of lessons just around strengthening abilities that children have. So this strength-based equity as opposed to need-based equity. I don't want to go too deep into it because I could talk on and on, but just to say that, let's say in the concept of this conversation, if a child has suffered from some sort of mold toxicity or water toxicity and they're feeling foggy and this is their unique situation, how can we help that become a way and a platform for them to have this unique mindset and this unique positioning? Because there's a story only they can tell. And once you help them to find that strength, how that can really be the road forward for them to unlock their own way that they learn and also maybe unlock for other students. So those are some of the things we're working on. If you go to rightfruit.org, I promise there's more salient explanations for the work that we're working on.
Thank you, Ebony Kinney. Thank you, panel. Thank you, audience. Remember, ripefruit.org is where you can find past Dean Talks and where you will see the schedule for future Dean Talks. My name is Stephen King, and I've been your host since the Dean Talks have started. We've been doing this for more than a year now, and we are just absolutely thrilled with the response and with the engagement from our audience. We will see you at the next Dean Talks, ripefruit.org for more.
Can I share for a minute?
Absolutely.
Yeah, I'd like to tell you all about a cool radio station that was kind enough to do a PSA for us. WHFC Radio 91.1 FM on the dial, and they're based at Harford Community College in Bel Air, Maryland. Anyone who wants to learn the art of radio or podcasting can start at WHFC. Their email is at whfc@harvard.edu, and their website is whfc911.org. So get in touch with them and learn more. WHFC is a scrappy local college radio station coming out of Harford Community College. About 50 people, from students to retirees, work really hard to create entertaining radio shows every week. If you like the feeling of surprise, check out WHFC. You never know what's going to happen next. And the award-winning documentary, Hiding in the Walls, that we saw a clip of earlier, won the Social and Economic Justice Film Festival Best Feature Film at the Middlebury New Filmmakers Festival, the Gaia Prize for Environmental Filmmaking. Thanks, everyone. It was a great discussion.
Before we jump off to, I see that Lisa joined us. Lisa, did you want to speak or just say hi? Just wanted to give you a second too, since you were here.
All right. Well, thank you very much for joining us for this session / episode / podcast of the day. So once again, we'll see you next time. Visit ripefruit.org. Check out our social media. As you can see, we have a lot going on at Ripe Fruit Foundation. The Dean Talks is just one of the many feathers in the Ripe Fruit Foundation cap. Thanks, everybody, for joining us. My name is Stephen King. We'll see you next time.